Alrighty. I hope everybody is having a great night so far. But my name is Mr. Kuklik. I am here today to talk about the Reformation for AP European history. So hopefully you guys are all in the right place for that one. As the title says, we are going to be talking about predominantly Luther's Reformation, but also on top of that, we're going to talk about Luther's Reformation. We're going to talk about the Reformation in Switzerland, both Zwingli and Calvin. And then we're also going to talk about the more radical Reformation and some of the implications of that. We are not going to talk about the Anglican Reformation. We are not going to talk about the wars of religion. We're not going to talk about the Counter-Reformation either. That will come later on. This is predominantly focused on like the beginning of the Reformation and kind of those stages of it. So the later parts will come in other streams. But for right now, we're just going to cover Luther's Reformation. So I hope everybody is having a wonderful beginning of the year. And hopefully everybody's right on track where they should be. I appreciate you guys joining me on this lovely Tuesday night. And we have a lot to get through. So I think we're going to go ahead and just jump into it, and hopefully people can kind of trickle in and trickle out. But let's go ahead and get rolling. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. With the new course and exam description, they just kind of changed some things. It used to be, the way I used to teach it was I did Renaissance and Reformation first unit, and then Age of Exploration into Wars of Religion. And it's changed since then. And that's totally okay. So I know some teachers, I'm sure, still teach Renaissance and Reformation. I had a thought I wanted to say, and it totally just left my brain. I will come back. Oh yeah, I did. I just got it. If you have any questions for me as we're going along, which I assume some of you guys are going to have, please put them in the Ask Questions tab. I'm going to answer all of them at the end. And that's really good for me so that I don't miss anything. But also, it's just helpful that if I go through and answer all the questions in one go. And oftentimes, if you have a question, I'll probably get around and answer it at some point. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. So Martin Luther and the Reformation, that is what we are going to be focusing on today. And let's see if I can go ahead. It says subtitle. Sorry about the weird subtitle underneath the word Reformation. Did not realize that was there. Let's just go ahead and move right along. All right. So real quick, of course, first thing I got to do, this is brought to you guys by Fiveable. Obviously, if you're watching this, you know a little bit about them. They are a really great group of educators. This really is a group that's founded by educators. They know what they're doing. They know what you guys need. And I'd highly recommend, if you enjoy this stream, just go ahead and sign up for a subscription, and you can go back and come watch all these past streams, especially if you got a lot of AP classes. This is a really helpful service. Underneath there is my Twitter. If you feel the urge to follow me, please do. That's my information. I tweet out the day I go live or the day before I go live. I'll tweet out about it. So give me a follow and let me know. I think my next stream is going to be in about 2 weeks. But that's where I post everything there. Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is what we're going to be focusing on today. We're going to talk about the overview of the Reformation. I'll talk a little bit about kind of what it is, what it encompasses, all that good stuff. We're going to talk about the church in the 16th century. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about what does the church actually look like. And a quick note here, guys. When I do a capital C church, I'm talking about the Catholic Church here, okay? Capital C church is Catholic Church, all right? Lowercase church, I'm talking about a more informal church. Capital C church, that's Catholic Church, okay? So we'll talk about what does the Catholic Church look like in the 16th century. Then we'll talk about Luther's Reformation and everything that is encompassed with that. The Reformation in Switzerland, the appeal of Protestantism. Why is the Protestant faith, Protestant brand of Christianity so appealing to people? And then lastly, we'll look at the looking ahead. I'll talk a little bit about what are the implications of all of this stuff. Okay, so oftentimes you're going to have what I like to think is like turning points in history, really big events that are going to completely shift the direction that everybody is heading in. I think the Protestant Reformation is really the first big one. All right. Another example would be like the French Revolution, but the Protestant Reformation is one of these big turning points in history. All right. So let's go ahead and we're just going to jump right into it. Okay. So overview of the Reformation here. What the heck is the Protestant Reformation? Very, very simply, this is just a split within the Catholic Church. Okay, a split within the Catholic Church. So similarly to, like, we can think about the split between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, the Great Schism, as it's sometimes called. This is kind of similar to that, although the Protestant Reformation is going to have kind of, I would say, more long-lasting, bigger consequences than the split between the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church. But it is a split of the Catholic Church. It's going to lead to the creation of several new Protestant denominations, okay? We'll talk about a few of these, but I think most of us here, if you're in the United States watching this, okay, most of the types of Christianity we're used to are Protestant Christianity, all right? Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, so on and so on and so on. The types of Christianity that most Americans see is Protestant Christianity. All right, this isn't true if you grew up in the Northeast. The Northeast, Catholicism is still very popular, but most of the United States, Protestant Christianity is the type of Christianity that most Americans kind of grow up and are most familiar with. Now, the big thing here is this is not a rejection of Christian ideas. All right, this is still Christianity. They are going to reject some of the things that the Catholic Church says, but this is not a rejection of Christianity. And this is something that we absolutely need to understand. Not a rejection of Christianity, okay? So where did it happen? We can kind of say that it began in Germany, but it's going to spread out throughout, I say throughout Western Germany here, but also some parts of Eastern Germany, but will spread predominantly through Western Germany, okay? So that's our overview of the Reformation. Like I said, there's going to be some really, really big implications here. But let's go ahead and we're going to dive just right into the major denominations here. Okay. So first of all, understanding why did it happen? First of all, the Renaissance. Okay. History is just one big line of cause and effect. All right. It's just one big cause and effect. So it makes sense that the Renaissance is going to play a serious role in the Protestant Reformation. The Renaissance is going to be kind of spewing all these ideas that are still very Christian, right? Like our Italian humanists are Christian. In fact, that's like what they spend most of their time doing, is convincing the Catholic Church that they are still Christian. But these ideas of like the person is important, the self is important, that you should have pride in who you are as a person, that's going to really, really encourage some Protestant thinkers like Luther, Calvin, that breaking away from the Catholic Church is our best bet here. Forming your own relationship with God, a personal relationship with God. That's an appealing idea. And a lot of that came from our humanists. All right. But also general dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church. Right. And the Catholic Church had been having problems for a very long time. I mean, pretty much since the start of the class, we talk about problems with the Catholic Church, all the way from like the Avignon papacy, right, where you have the Catholic Church, the papacy moving from Rome to France. That was a total power grab by the French king. And then also the schism, where you have upwards of 3 popes elected at once, right? How can there be 3 of God's representatives on earth at the same time? All right. So there are some issues with the Catholic Church. Now, what we're going to look at here for our purposes, these are our major denominations. First, you have the Lutherans, right? This makes a lot of sense. These are our first real set of Protestants. Calvinists, they're going to be very important as well. Huguenots, that's a term you need to know, especially for the French Wars of Religion. These are really just French Calvinists. They are a very small minority in France, but a very important minority in France. And then I say Henry VIII and Elizabeth I and the Anglicans. All right. Now, we're not going to talk about the Anglicans here. Okay. That's going to be talked about in another stream. However, they are also going to massively change the course of English history. Henry VIII, you guys all know the story. So just dissatisfied with the fact that he can't have a male heir, that he's going to break away with from the Catholic Church so that he can annul his marriage and get married again. Elizabeth I is going to kind of clean things up, though. She's going to really be the one that establishes the Anglican faith. And then last, but certainly not least, you have John Knox and the establishment of Presbyterianism. Presbyterianism will be very important later on for the English Civil War. All right. But these are our major denominations that we'll talk most about with this class. I'll mention the Anabaptists. All right. I'll mention the Zwinglians. All right. But those guys, they really don't play a huge role in European history. Okay. So let's keep marching forward. I'm going to go ahead. I see we already have a question. Let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and answer this one right now. Are these slideshows available on the website outside of Crowdcast? Yes. So if you sign up for Fiveable, you will have access to these websites. Okay. If you watch my past live stream I did on the Italian Renaissance, I have document packets that I give all of my students at the beginning of each unit. And I'm trying to make those available to you guys. And if you sign up for Fiveable, you should have access for those as well. I'll mention them sometimes. I mention them a lot in the Italian Renaissance, but those document packets are really great. They hit the highlights of major primary sources that you guys need to know. But yes, if you sign up for Fiveable, the slideshows will be available. All right. So let's talk about the church in the 16th century. I know we're moving at kind of a quick pace. I do have a lot I want to get through in an hour. But like I said, if you sign up, you'll have access to this. You can go back and watch. But let's go ahead. Let's talk about the church up to the 16th century. So Europeans in the Middle Ages. I don't need to tell you guys again how pious Middle Age Europeans really were. Christianity and religion. This is like what they're trying to get. This is what they're going for, right? I said when I did my Italian Renaissance presentation, they have horse blinders on. They just keep looking forward. They keep looking towards heaven, right? That's what they're living for. Christians are incredibly pious. Now, that being said, there were absolutely people who had problems with the Catholic Church. A lot of people had problems with the Catholic Church. Now, most people didn't openly speak about their problems with the Catholic Church, but a lot of people were aggravated with some of the things that the church was doing. And we can kind of point to the reason for that, because these people, they were so deeply pious, they were so deeply religious, that what they wanted the church to really help them get to heaven, right? So when the church isn't holding up that end of the bargain, they're going to be upset. Now, we do have two early medieval reformers that I do want to mention here, John Wycliffe and John Huss. I'm going to mention them very briefly. It is entirely possible that you'll see specifically Wycliffe, I think. I mean, you could see both of them on the AP exam, but I'll mention them very briefly here. John Wycliffe, he's operating out of England. And John Wycliffe, what he does is he writes these pamphlets and these letters, pretty much saying that it doesn't really matter who you are. You have religious authority based on your merit, based on who you are, based on how good of a Christian you are. Now, this idea that merit or that religious, that your religious spot in the church or your position within the church should be based around merit really goes against a lot of what the Catholic Church is trying to do, right? Like a lot of the Catholic Church or a lot of the clergy positions you're bought into, or you buy into those positions. And so you got this guy, John Wycliffe, talking about how those positions should be based on merit. That's really dangerous for a lot of these people who bought their way into the job. Now, John Wycliffe is going to have some minor protection from the English nobility. Eventually, he is going to be pretty much exiled, and we're not going to hear much from him again. Now, John Huss is going to leave a much hotter legacy, in that John Huss is going to subscribe to a lot of what Wycliffe has to say, but take a step further, going so far as to saying the whole entire Catholic Church is corrupt and that the Pope is the Antichrist. This guy does call the Pope the Antichrist. If there's one big rule in European history, is that you don't call the Pope the Antichrist. John Huss will be arrested and he will be burned at the stake. However, John Huss's legacy is going to be very big. He's going to start this movement, the Hussites, of people that follow John Huss and his ideas. He's going to be kind of seen as this martyr for the cause. All right, both of these guys, they make impacts, but the impacts aren't that big, not compared to someone like Luther, okay? But there are these early reformers within European society who want to see the Catholic Church change. Now, we cannot talk about change in the Catholic Church without talking about my boy, Desiderius Erasmus, one of my absolutely favorite people from European history. This guy is awesome. If you haven't read excerpts from Praise of Folly, you got to go out and do it. He's a master of sarcasm. Master of sarcasm. All right. Now, I don't need to tell you guys that Erasmus, his big thing is that European society is jacked up. It's messed up. Okay. There is a lot of people doing really immoral things. The clergy doesn't know how to read. You have lawyers and tax collectors that are just taking money from people. Erasmus just pokes fun of European society. All right. But what he's highlighting more broadly is this bigger idea of what's called anti-clericalism. Okay. And anti-clericalism really just means anti-clergy, right? This is just opposition to the clergy here. And this was an idea that starts to float around in the 14 and 1500s of people who aren't opposed to the Catholic Church, but are opposed to these clergy members that aren't upholding their vows. All right. So the clergy, they were supposed to be a few things. One, they were supposed to be celibate, which means you can't have kids. You can't have a wife. All right. They were also supposed to be able to read Latin. Okay. They're also supposed to be educated. They're supposed to be able to conduct church services. There were some clergy members that weren't doing any of these things. So a lot of clergy members that were going around and that they were having all these illegitimate children. They were going around and they were committing these sins. They couldn't read Latin. They couldn't give a proper church service. Okay. They just couldn't do any of these things that the clergy members were supposed to be able to do. And Erasmus, he pokes fun at this, and in Praise of Folly, he talks a lot about how, it's so hypocritical that the clergy member is supposed to be able to read the Bible, but they can't even read Latin. All right. Now, also, besides just your Northern Christian humanists and your scholars having problems with the clergy, you also had clashes within the nobility and the leadership of these European countries and states. All right. So the big example here is that the members of the clergy, they were tax exempt. They did not have to pay taxes. Okay. And if I'm a noble, I'm going to be pretty darn irritated that this little Italian clergy member who bought his way into this position doesn't have to pay me, a German prince, taxes. All right. And that was another big problem, is you're going to see clashes between the nobility and the clergy members, especially over money. Okay. So that's where we're at with the church up to the 1600s. It's got some problems. Things are probably going to change, right? Something's got to give. Either the church has to change or some sort of radicalness is going to happen. All right. And unfortunately for the Catholic Church, Martin Luther comes along. Now, Martin Luther, and those are his dates up there. 1483 to 1546. Martin Luther, he is often credited with starting the Protestant Reformation. Okay, Martin Luther is the guy that him nailing his 95 Theses on the church doors in Wittenberg, that starts the Protestant Reformation. Okay, and in a lot of ways that is true. We can say Martin Luther, this is our guy who starts the Protestant Reformation. Now, who is he? So Martin Luther has a really interesting origin story here. So Martin Luther, he was actually a trained lawyer. He was in law school. He had already received a master's degree. Famously, his father, he was kind of this like lower level. We could almost call him a peasant that worked really, really hard to elevate Luther and get him into school. Luther goes, he attends law school, and then one day when he's traveling home in the middle of the night, this big thunderstorm breaks out, and it's super scary, and there's lightning striking all over the place, and Luther thinks he's dead. He thinks like he's not making it off this road, and he prays and he prays and he prays, and he says that I will become a monk if I survive this storm, and sure enough, he does, and he becomes a monk, an Augustinian monk. Okay, and that is really where he starts his journey to what will lead him to nailing his 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg. All right. And as a priest, and then later as a professor of theology at the University of Wittenberg, he's going to be really, really tormented with this idea that he's not worthy, that he is constantly full of sin, that he cannot get rid of the sin because every time that he does, there's more sin that's imbued onto him, and that he's just not worthy to go to heaven, and that God is going to spite him, and that God is going to punish him in some way. And he's obsessed with this idea. He's obsessed with this idea that he's just simply not worthy. And it's this obsession and this self-torment that will lead him to his new ideas of Christianity. And eventually it's in this torment, it's in this constant thought that he is just not worthy, that he's going to come to the conclusion that salvation, that this idea of going to heaven, this is not something that it has to be earned. This is a gift from God. This is something that is given to everybody. It is not something that you necessarily have to earn. And Luther is going to famously come up with this idea that salvation is achieved through faith alone. If you remember anything from Luther, remember salvation by faith alone. That is his big takeaway here. Okay. So only salvation will lead, or only faith will lead to salvation. That's his big takeaway here. He also says that salvation, like I said, this is a gift from God. This is not something that you have to earn. This is something that God is giving you. Right, we can think about to our knowledge of like Christianity here. Okay, Jesus is crucified and dies for our sins. Right, that's the basic teaching of Christianity. Okay, and Luther is basing this idea that because Jesus died for our sins, that idea of salvation that is given to us. Right, that is the great sacrifice that Jesus made for that salvation. We don't have to earn that. All right, and furthermore, Luther believes that the church cannot lead you to salvation. The church is a great conduit. Okay, but only you yourself can actually achieve that salvation. All right, these are Luther's big ideas here. Now, these ideas are problematic for the Catholic Church, and we're going to kind of look at why. All right, let's get an emoji in chat of how we're feeling so far about the Reformation. Are you guys feeling good? Do you guys have questions about it, or are we feeling like this makes a lot of sense? I love the Reformation. This is definitely one of my favorite time periods in European history. I think it's just really, really interesting. And the ramifications that it has is awesome. Good. You guys are good. That's amazing. Awesome. Yeah, it's all pretty straightforward. Where it kind of gets confusing is when you're trying to remember the different, like, what does Calvin believe versus what does Luther believe? Okay. And for some reason, the AP or College Board on the AP exam loves to harp on the differences between Calvin and Luther. But this is all pretty straightforward so far. So I'm glad that you guys are feeling good about it. All right. So let's talk about the big I word, indulgences. Indulgences. All right. So let's talk about what this actually is. Most of what encourages Luther to actually act here centered around the selling of indulgences, right? We can kind of look at indulgences as like the catalyst here. This is what really gets Luther moving. What an indulgence is, very, very simply, this is a waiver that the church can give out to people that forgives sins for yourself or later on a loved one. And an indulgence is not necessarily like new for the Catholic Church, okay? The Catholic Church has been given out indulgences for a very long time. We can actually trace indulgences all the way back to the Crusades. They were giving out indulgences if you went on crusade, right? You go on crusade, heck, you don't even have to make it there. If you die, you're going to heaven, right? You went on crusade. So that's a really early version of an indulgence, all right? But the idea that you have to do something to forgive your sins, that's like Catholicism 101. Go make a pilgrimage. Go say Hail Marys, right? Go do these things, and your sin's going to be forgiven, okay? Now, where things get problematic is that the Catholic Church realizes they can make a pretty penny off of selling indulgences to illiterate peasants, okay? And that really is the problem here, is that they start to sell these indulgences for a very, very high price. I mean, we're talking about like a month's wages in some cases. These are not cheap. And what the indulgence did is that it would remove yourself or a loved one. It would remove years from years that you would have to spend in purgatory. Purgatory is kind of this place between heaven and hell that the Catholic Church starts ramping up in the late Middle Ages. It's a place where you go to burn off all your sins before you get into heaven. And the Catholic Church said that most people were not going straight to heaven. The only people that were going straight to heaven were really martyrs. Okay. And so because of this, the Catholic Church is saying that you are going to go to purgatory. You're going to go be there. It's pretty much just going to be hell 2.0 while you're burning off your sins. Then you go to heaven after a few thousand years. Okay. It was a really scary thing for peasants who they're really, really looking forward to heaven. Okay. And so they start selling these indulgences to people that say, hey, if you buy this indulgence, you're going to spring your old Uncle Larry out of purgatory. Doesn't that sound pretty sweet? And people bought into it, right? Because Christianity is the most important thing in their life. Why wouldn't you buy into it? And these indulgences are really what's going to set Luther off. Okay. So as Luther was forming these new ideas of Christianity, as he's becoming more and more troubled and tormented with the ideas of, or with the idea that he's not worthy, Pope Leo X authorizes the selling of indulgences in his region. Okay. It almost happens at like the most inopportune time for the Catholic Church. And the story behind this is you've got this guy, Albert of Mainz, okay, the Archbishop of Mainz. It's this guy, he buys this position from the Catholic Church, okay? Now, in order to fund this position, or in order to pay for this position for the Catholic Church, the Archbishop of Mainz, he donates a large amount of money to the Catholic Church, right? He donates it, right? And he says, here's all this money. I want to be Archbishop of Mainz. The Catholic Church says, great, this is awesome. Here's the title. And then at the same time, what happens is that the Pope and the new Archbishop of Mainz, they come to this agreement that they are going to sell some indulgences to help pay for all this, right? The Archbishop needs to make some money back because he took out a loan to pay the Catholic Church, okay? And then the Catholic Church wants to make some money too. So they come to this agreement that says, okay, you start selling indulgences and we'll all take some profit from it. And so that's exactly what happens. And they hired this guy, Johann Tetzel, to sell these indulgences from town to town throughout this region of Germany. All right. And Johann Tetzel, I mean, this guy was like a used car salesman 101. This guy was amazing at what he did. He would go into towns and he would scare, no pun intended, the hell out of people. He would scare people so much, saying, you're going to purgatory unless you buy this piece of paper. All right. So if you guys can, go on YouTube, go find the movie Luther. The movie Luther, it came out in like 2004, I think. The full movie's on YouTube. There is a great scene in that where Johann Tetzel, he's going around and selling these indulgences, and it's a really good example of how he's able to sell these indulgences to people. Now, Luther witnesses the selling of these indulgences, and it pisses Luther off to absolutely no end. He's horrified by this. Here's this guy saying that he can forgive you for your sins. And Luther says, no one can forgive you for your sins. What is this guy talking about? And in this rage, Luther writes and publishes his famed 95 Theses. Okay. So this 95 Theses, the full title here, Luther's 95 Theses on the Power of Indulgences. This is addressed to the Archbishop of Mainz. He addresses the 95 Theses to the Archbishop of Mainz. If you find the full thing, it will say like, Dear Archbishop of Mainz at the top. All right. And here in his 95 Theses, really, Luther is just focusing on the sale of indulgences. But more broadly, it's been used to talk about the general problems that Luther has with the Catholic Church. Originally, Luther publishes this in Latin. He puts it in a letter and he mails it out to the Archbishop of Mainz. Okay, eventually, this is going to be translated into German and it's going to be spread across Europe. Okay, this thing is going to be hot. It's going to go viral in every sense of the word. And the 95 Theses are going to put Luther on the map. You know, no pun intended. They are putting Luther on the map. Now, the big question here, was this actually nailed to the church door in Wittenberg? And this is still kind of a question. Most people say, yeah, it was nailed to the church door in Wittenberg. We've got some evidence that it was, but we have no real solid evidence, which is just kind of funny because he does initially address this to the Archbishop of Mainz. But regardless, it goes super, super viral. It goes all over the place, and it makes Luther incredibly popular. Okay. Now, Luther is at first not really focused on breaking from the church. Luther has no desire to break away from the Catholic Church. Luther just wants to reform the church. And in fact, he's kind of got this idea that if the Pope or the cardinals or the bishops, they hear what I have to say, they're going to agree with me. The church is going to agree with me here, right? These grievances that I have, they're not ill-founded. Now, we know that the church does not agree with Luther here. Super duper doesn't agree with Luther here. They're not thrilled with this guy. Okay. And the church is going to fight, really, really hard against Luther and his ideas. Okay. They tried desperately to bring him to Rome. Okay. And Luther is very aware that if he goes to Rome, he's not coming back with his life. And so between the years of 1517 and 1521, they're going to really fight against Luther. And then eventually in 1521, Luther is excommunicated. But at this point, Luther is so fed up with the Catholic Church that he burns his letter of excommunication publicly in protest. All right. Luther's done with the Catholic Church. He's over the Catholic Church. Okay. And then in 1521, he attends the famed Diet of Worms. Diet of Worms. Okay. Diet of Worms. Worms is a town in Germany. Well, the Holy Roman Empire, but you know what I mean. Okay. And the Diet of Worms is called by a young Charles V, who we can see seated up front and center of this picture here on his nice throne. Can you save this? Can you save the, Jalen, are you talking about the PowerPoint? Because the PowerPoint will be available at Fiveable. The Fiveable website, if you get a subscription, you can go back and look at this. But this is a nice painting of the Diet of Worms. You can see Charles V front and center, the young Holy Roman Emperor, Emperor of Austria, Holy Roman Emperor. He calls the Diet of Worms to try to address this troubled monk, this troubled priest. And here at the Diet of Worms, Luther is asked to recant everything he says. Okay, and it's here that Luther says probably one of his more famous lines. He says, "Here I stand, I can do nothing else," saying that I can stand in front of you, but I will not recant. And Luther doesn't recant. He doesn't recant. And it's with this that we see the real break with the Catholic Church. Okay, but after this, Luther is going to gain, or during this time, Luther has immense popularity. Okay. The German peasants, the German nobility, they love this guy. Okay. And we'll look a little bit later on of exactly why that is. But let's talk about the Reformation in Switzerland. Okay. And when we're talking about the Reformation in Switzerland, we got to first talk about this guy here, Erlich Zwingli. And Zwingli is actually a really interesting guy. He pops up right around the same time as Luther. I think within like 2 years of Luther, Zwingli is he's in Switzerland talking about very, very similar ideas. All right, so Zwingli and Luther, they have a lot in common. Okay, he is originally a Swiss humanist, I guess still a Swiss humanist, but he admired Erasmus a lot, much like Luther. He admired Erasmus a lot. And it's in Switzerland, in the city of Zurich specifically, that Zwingli sets up a church and he establishes his brand of Protestantism. Okay. And Zwingli's Protestantism is almost identical to Luther's Protestantism, almost word for word, the exact same ideas. The one place where Zwingli and Luther differ. And in fact, Luther and Zwingli actually get to meet each other and they have this very long debate, and it's super cool. And the one thing that they disagree on is the Eucharist, or communion, the bread and the wine. Luther believes that the Eucharist, this is actually the spiritual body and blood of Christ, that the bread and the wine is the spiritual body and blood of Christ. Zwingli says this is just a representation of the body and the blood of Christ. Okay, it's a minor difference. To us, this seems like a minor difference, but it's really funny because Luther and Zwingli walk away kind of like, oh man, we were almost friends there. Too bad, right? This minor difference is really what separates them. Okay. But Zwingli is important here, but he's definitely not nearly as important as our next boy here, John Calvin. John Calvin, he is born in 1509. Okay, so he's going to be but a wee little babe during the heyday of Martin Luther. All right, but he lives from 1509 to 1564. And John Calvin, he's French, born in France. However, he's going to spend most of his time in Geneva. All right, Calvin has this big awakening in 1533, and he converts to Protestantism, and he's promptly run out of France because he's a very, very vocal Protestant. And he's going to escape to Geneva, and it's in Geneva that he is going to establish his brand of Protestantism, Calvinism. Now, Calvinism is very different than, I'd say very, but it's different from Lutheranism, okay? Calvin believes in some similar things, right? Salvation by faith alone, the scripture is the true word, that it is a personal relationship with God. However, he is going to have some differences here, and his big difference is predestination. The idea that it's already determined who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. That's predestination right there. Who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. Predestination right there. Okay. And the Calvin and his Calvinists, they believe through and through in predestination. And the question I get asked all the time is why the heck, if he believes so heavily in predestination, why the heck wouldn't anybody just why do people try to be good Christians, right? If I believed in predestination, I'm going to go wild. Why not? Okay. And the answer to this is because Calvin starts saying this idea or starts preaching this idea that you have to live a nice moral life, a very simple, plain life, because that is a good indication that you're actually going to heaven. Okay. And that really is what Calvin sells, is that in order to be a good Christian, you have to live a very simple, a very clean, a very, a life free of debauchery, things like alcohol and dancing and partying, right? You can't do any of that if you're a good Calvinist, because people that are going to heaven, they don't do this kind of things. Okay. He also believes that God is omnipotent. He's all knowing, that humanity does not have free will, that's an illusion. All right. It's a slightly depressing way to live, I would say, but people really like the idea. Okay. People really like the idea. And we call Calvin's church the Reformed Church of the Reformed Church more broadly, right? The Reformed Church. In Geneva, the Geneva is ruled in this Calvinist sort of state and religion in a very, very iron fist fashion. Okay. The church and the city, they are one here. All right. Those that rule this, that govern the city, they are also very important members within the Calvinist church. Okay. And the rules of the city, they're enforced pretty heavily, whether it be exile or even death, right? They put their fair share of people to death for breaking some of these rules, right? No adultery, no committing these cardinal sins, right? You have to live a good moral life. And so it was a very much kind of this I don't want to use necessarily iron fist, but it was a very, very rigid lifestyle, especially compared to someone like Luther, who loved his beer. And that is the truth. Calvin does go on to inspire several other people. Okay. So Calvin's Reformed Church would go on to inspire several different other very important kind of brands of Calvinism. So first of all, the Huguenots in France, they are a form, or they are kind of like an offshoot of the Calvinists. Like I said, they are going to be the most important minority of Protestants in France. They are going to be central in the French wars of religion, but also the Presbyterians in Scotland. And I want to talk a little bit about the Presbyterians here, because they are going to go on to be very important. Okay. Organized by our guy, John Knox here, founded on the basis of Calvinist ideas. Okay. But more broadly, what he's saying here is that the church should be really not necessarily like this hierarchy, right? Like the hierarchy pyramid, like the Catholic Church is, but instead that everybody should have a say. All of the priests, right? Everybody that's involved in the Catholic or in the Presbyterian Church should have a say in the church. All right. And so the nobility of Scotland is going to really, really support this guy, because they want to say in what happens, in their church, but also in their state. Okay. So Presbyterianism is going to be really, really important when we talk about the Scots coming in to rule England and then the English Civil War. So just something to be aware of. The Presbyterians, they're going to pop back up again. All right. So I do have a question here. Did Luther go into hiding after the Deed of Worms? Yeah, so Luther is pretty much in and out of hiding through much of his his life. He's predominantly being kept safe by Frederick of Saxony. That's where he's living. So he's in and out of hiding. Towards the end of his life, he's a little bit more public, especially when he knows he for sure has the protection that he's looking for. But yeah, he is in and out of hiding. And when he's in hiding, that's where he does a lot of things. Most famously, he translates the Latin Bible to German. Okay. And what's really interesting is his dialect of German will become the established written German dialect, which is pretty cool. Where was John Calvin originally from? France. John Calvin is originally from France. Lyon, I believe he's from the Lyonese area, and he's going to eventually migrate to Geneva. Wasn't Martin Luther King Jr. also inspired by Martin Luther? Yeah, so this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'm not a huge American history person. I have heard that. I have also heard that Martin Luther King Jr. was also heavily inspired by Gandhi and the peaceful protests, right? But I'm not going to spend too much time on civil rights. But good, really good question though. Okay, let's keep rocking and rolling, folks. Let's talk about differences in Protestant beliefs. All right. So more broadly, Protestant belief rested on the idea that Scripture is the key to salvation, right? Like I said, salvation by faith alone. That's what Luther formed his big ideas on. Okay. Protestants also believed Protestants also believe that the only true authority is God, not the clergy. Okay, definitely differed from the Catholic Church here. All right, also believed that out of the 7 sacraments, and these were the seven godly or Christian things that every good Catholic Christian had to do. Out of these 7 sacraments, Protestants say only 2 are valid: the Eucharist, which is communion, or the bread and the blood of Christ, the bread and the wine, body and blood of Christ, and baptism. Baptism and the Eucharist, the only 2 valid sacraments according to Protestants. Now they're going to differ about what these actually look like, but those are the 2 valid sacraments according to Protestants. Now, Protestants also believe that the church, and I put this in quotes because the church is kind of this bigger idea. It's not just a physical building, like what actually makes up the church. Protestants say the church is a priesthood of all believers. The church is made up of everybody. Everybody who believes is part of the church, which Catholics wouldn't necessarily agree with this. The church, that's made up by the clergy, the people that are actually employed by the church. Okay, there were definitely differences between the denominations, and I talk about them between Calvinism and Protestantism. But these were some base ideas that bound them all together. Okay. Now, why was Protestantism so appealing? Well, it was really appealing to a lot of different people for kind of all the same reasons. People liked the idea that they were given some freedom over their religion, right? All of a sudden, people are saying, hey, you yourself get to have a personal relationship with God. And that's a very, very powerful idea. Okay. And a lot of people really like this. One, if you're a peasant saying that, hey, you get to read the Bible and you get to form your own relationship with God. Heck yeah, that's awesome. Okay. If I'm an educated scholar that studied humanism, I love the idea of being personal, having your own personal relationship with God. If I'm part of the nobility, I'm all on board on kind of pushing away some power of the Catholic Church. Okay. There are a lot of really, really big reasons why I would love the Catholic Church, or I would love the Protestant Church, right? It's very, very appealing. Now, that being said, Protestantism, it's going to have this massive upshoot in popularity, and it's going to kind of slowly dwindle back down. It's still going to remain popular and predominant in Central Europe, in Scandinavia. It's going to be very popular as well. Okay. But it is going to kind of dwindle back down as more people fade back to the Catholic Church. All right. But the Counter-Reformation, we'll talk all about that. Okay. Now, I do want to briefly, and I know we're almost out of time, but I do want to briefly mention a few last things. One, radical Reformation. Okay. Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, Knox, they were all popular reformers, but they were not the only reformers. Okay. You did have some reformers that were seen as Counter-Reformation stream is this weekend. Okay. So make sure you guys tune into that. Sorry, did not mean to interrupt myself, but you need to tune in. Counter-Reformation. Very, very important. Okay. Now these guys were popular reformers, but they weren't the only ones. You had a lot of people that were saying a lot of different ideas about religions. The Anabaptists tend to be the most infamous of these reformers. Anabaptists were radical reformers. Their big thing was that they believed in adulthood baptism, which I know is super scandalous to us today, being baptized as an adult, but it was a very, very big deal at the time. Okay. And they were seen, they were shunned from society. Okay. And a lot of these radical reformers were persecuted. However, their ideas did tend to stick around, and they influenced a lot of prominent denominations today. Anabaptists, Baptist, right? We see the connection there. Now, my favorite story of Anabaptists, it's a little bit morbid, but Anabaptists, they seized the city of Münster, and they seized this city and they established this like Anabaptist, I almost want to call it like utopia, because they seize all the property. It's very socialist. And they seize the city of Münster, and Protestants and Catholics alike, they take the city back from the Anabaptists, and when they get in there, they round up the leaders of the Anabaptist movement, and what they do is they execute them, and then they hang their bodies from these cages in the main church in Münster, right? And those cages are still there, believe it or not, but they hang their bodies there, and they eventually remove the bones a little bit later, but those cages are still there in Münster, which is just wild to me. But moving on here. So I do want to talk about the German Peasant Revolt real quick. Okay, this is a revolt that happens in 1525 in response to a lot of things, as most peasant revolts tend to be. Mostly it has to do with bad harvests, but also the nobility is collecting more taxes. But they're also these German peasants are really fueled by what Luther is saying. And Luther is pretty much, what peasants are hearing, and you can't really blame them here. Peasants are hearing that, hey, you get to decide what your life looks like. Okay, that's what a lot of peasants are hearing, that you get to have a lot more control over your life. And so peasants take this and they run with it. Okay. Now this is going to be throughout the year 1525, and is going to be brutal and bloody, as most peasant revolts tend to be. And Luther, although he initially supports the peasant revolt, eventually he is going to side with the nobility here. And he's going to pretty much tell the nobility, hey, yeah, you got to put them down. He tells the peasants, hey, you guys got to cool it. All right. And the nobility, they demolish the peasant revolt. Upwards of like 70,000 peasants are killed here. It's brutal. And it's after this that Luther actually loses a lot of support, a lot of this popular support, because people see him as sort of a traitor. So the German Peasant Revolt is important here for kind of understanding the lore of Luther. All right, so almost done. I know this was a lot of information, but this was a really big topic. To wrap things up, let's look here at these guys. All right, so Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, and then radical Reformation. So these are my big takeaways here from each of these guys. One, Luther, salvation by faith alone. 2 of the 7 sacraments. People should have a personal relationship with God. All right. This is Lutheranism 101 at this time. And this is going to kind of really also be the groundwork for other future reformations. All right, let's look at Zwingli. Same basic ideas as Luther, but they had different ideas of the Eucharist. Remember, Luther and Zwingli, they were so close to being friends, but they differed on the Eucharist. Calvin, Predestination, conservative and reserved life. Predestination is the big one here, okay? I think a few years ago, there was actually a short answer question that was talking about similarities and differences between Calvin and Luther. The big difference here, predestination, okay? And remember, predestination, that just means that God has already determined who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. And last but not least, radical reformation here. Ideas about practicing Christianity that were not as popular, but still managed to survive and hang on, and laid a lot of the groundwork for future Reformation denominations, Protestant denominations. So that is it. That is the Protestant Reformation in a nutshell. On Thursday, there's going to be a stream about the English Reformation. I highly, highly suggest you tune in. The English Reformation is very, very different from the Protestant Reformation, okay? It's going to be a very different, really different roadmap of how it progresses, okay? So make sure you tune into that one. Let's go ahead and get those last questions in right now while I talk about my last thing here. And I want to talk about looking ahead. So first of all, in chat, who is this guy here? Who are we looking at right here? Does anybody know? The infamous Cardinal of France. The bad guy in the Three Musketeers, okay? He gets kind of a bad rap, and I don't know if that's necessarily, I think it might be deserved here. Yes, it is Cardinal Richelieu. Now, the Protestant Reformation is going to have huge implications here, massive implications. It's going to totally shape change the religious landscape of Europe, okay? Not only is it going to encourage other revolutions and reforms, but on top of that, it's going to incite war that's going to last until 1648, okay? War that is going to take the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, okay? So the Protestant Reformation, it has huge implications here. It is one of the big turning points in European history, okay? Wars of religion is going to be covered later on, all right? But it is a direct result of the Protestant Reformation, all right? So let's answer these questions, and then I will wrap things up. So what was Zwingli's importance? So Zwingli, it depends on who you talk to. I think Zwingli's kind of an interesting guy just because he pops up at the same time as Luther and has very similar ideas. But a lot of people, like some textbooks, they mention Zwingli once and they predominantly focus on Calvin. I think it's a good thing to know. Are you going to see Zwingli on the AP exam? Not necessarily. You're more likely to see Calvin. I think Zwingli is important, though, for understanding the development of Protestantism in Europe, though. Good question, though. What was the name of the German peasant that kind of led the revolt, who at first believed in Luther's ideas and then rejected his ideas? I actually don't know the answer to this. There's a guy, I can think of, his name is on the tip of my tongue, and Spalatin, possibly. That might be wrong, though. But I'm actually not sure. That's a good question. I am not sure the answer to that, though. Thomas Munster. Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Thomas Munster. See, that's things that even I'm learning. All right, can we quickly go over the difference between the Counter-Reformation and the Catholic Reformation? Yeah, sure. So I would say the names tend to be used pretty interchangeably. I use them interchangeably, admittedly. If we're thinking about differences, though, the Catholic Reformation was all about reforming the Catholic Church, as the name suggests. So we can kind of think about things like setting up seminary schools. You can't sell indulgences anymore. Things like that. Education for priests, that you can't hold more than one position. No more nepotism. Things like that. There's reforming the way that the Catholic Church does things. While the Counter-Reformation was more of a general thing that we used to talk about how the church responds to Reformation. And we can kind of think more broadly about the Council of Trent there. The Council of Trent is going to reaffirm Catholic doctrine. And they're going to double down on it. They're going to double down on the seven sacraments. They're going to double down on the importance of good charitable works. They're going to double down on all of that stuff while reforming some of the not so great practices. So for the most part, those things are used interchangeably, but the Catholic Reformation tends to simply refer to the ways that the Catholic Church changed, while the Counter-Reformation was more of how the church responded to the Reformation and how they worked to get people back to the Catholic Church, which by all accounts, it was pretty successful. A lot of people do convert back. All right, so that is it. Man, I feel like I just talked a bunch, but I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any further questions that you guys think about, next Thursday, you can tune into the stream on the Counter-Reformation and drop some questions in there. On the 21st, Mr. Clancy, as he just put in chat, is going to be going in depth on the Catholic Counter-Reformation. So join him there, talk all about the Council of Trent. But if you got any questions, drop it in there. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mr. Kuklik. If you've got any questions, just shoot me a message on there. But I do appreciate you guys tuning in. I know some of you guys on the East Coast, this was a late one. It is about bedtime for me. Those that are on the West Coast, your afternoon has just begun. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Good luck for those that are testing this week. And I will be back, I think, in 2 weeks. I could be wrong there. But if you follow me on Twitter, I will post it there. Thank you, Mr. Clancy, for tuning in. Thank you all you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it so much. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night.